This is WFYI News Now. It's October 29th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, a $20 million grant for Indy's first low-barrier shelter. A large fire broke out at a Veterans Community Center this weekend. And a new study from Trans Lifeline raises concerns about the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
These interventions can traumatize and discourage people from reaching out for help, and that is the opposite of what we want.
Those stories coming up, but first. The Indiana Fever fired coach Christie Sides on Sunday. Sides went 33-47 in her 2 seasons with the squad, including going 20-20 this season. The Fever made the playoffs as the 6th seed and were swept in the first round by the Connecticut Sun. Whoever takes over the Fever will have a strong team to work with, led by Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. The pair have won at least 2 WNBA Rookie of the Year awards. Indiana is the 6th team to make a coaching change this offseason, joining Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago, Washington, and Los Angeles. All of the coaches let go had 3 years or less experience. State money has been approved for the first low-barrier shelter in Indianapolis. WFYI's Jill Sheridan reports on the $20 million grant.
The funding was identified at the end of the last legislative session and will help create a one-stop shop for people experiencing homelessness. The project will offer support services alongside a low-barrier shelter, giving people a place to stay while they find more permanent housing. The Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority gave final approval for the funds last week. The city has allocated $12 million for the project. The city has adopted a number of new housing-first efforts in recent years, but some advocates have said more should be directed towards the effort instead of investing in a shelter. A Near East Side location has been identified for the housing hub. It's scheduled to open in late 2026. An annual count of the number of people experiencing homelessness in Indianapolis was up slightly this year compared to last. I'm Jill Sheridan.
A large fire broke out at a Veterans Community Center Saturday night, displacing more than 50 people. The Colonel Donald W. Moreau Senior Veterans Community Center serves veterans facing homelessness, providing resources like food, clothing, and access to hygiene supplies. Firefighters with the Indianapolis Fire Department rescued 18 people from inside the building. 3 people were transported to Eskenazi Hospital for minor injuries. The Indianapolis Fire Department and the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department are investigating the cause of the fire. The community center is the central hub for Helping Veterans and Families, or HVAF, which is Indiana's largest nonprofit serving veterans facing homelessness, according to their website. Indigo brought in buses for temporary shelter. The Red Cross also helped arrange hotel stays for the displaced residents. And for our final story today, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is the largest hotline network in the country. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports a study from Trans Lifeline raises concerns about 988's practices around consent, among other things.
Researchers say study participants highlighted the lack of informed consent in emergency interventions as a result of interacting with 988. Olga Forster is one of the researchers. They say non-consensual interventions can include instances where the help seeker is unaware the crisis center may involve law enforcement or use geo-tracking services.
These interventions can traumatize and discourage people from reaching out for help, and that is the opposite of what we want.
Forster says the possibility of incarceration and forced hospitalization can also affect trust in hotlines, especially for people of color, people with disabilities, and the LGBTQIA+ community. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Abigail Ruman.
The report also raised concerns about transparency, safety, and the disclosure of emergency intervention data. That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by Drew Daudelin, with support from the news team at WFYI and public media journalists across the state. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. Kendall Antron produced our music, and I'm your host, Abriana Herron. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share. And follow WFYI on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.